Rumors that there was a close encounter with aliens at Holloman Air Force Base have been swirling since at least the 1970s. There is even a supposed film of the flying saucer landing.
There was an alleged contact between extraterrestrials and the U.S. military-industrial complex that took place at the Holloman Air Force Base. And what's interesting about this particular case is that this group of extraterrestrials seems to have a very elaborate headdress that was on, as well as unusual faces that were kind of very small with pronounced nasal features. These ETs, like many of the others, did apparently want peace and wanted to negotiate some sort of positive settlement for Earth's problems, but as is the case, they want disarming of nuclear weapons, the truth told to the people, and the government just laughed in their faces.
When we start getting into the upper, highest level echelon of the cover-up of the UFO phenomenon, I still feel that I need to be careful and researchers need to be careful. Who's the actual person at the top of it? Is it David Rockefeller? Is it some member of the Rothschild family? Is it some member that we don't know about within the deep black budget community? Or is it the aliens themselves in one form or another? I guess we can ask ourselves, what is the likelihood that the non-human intelligences that are behind the UFO phenomenon are managing the cover-up to some extent? I think we could say a few things. One, we can say they do not have an interest in being out there, in being publicly acknowledged. They do operate by stealth. I think they've always operated by stealth. So they have an interest in maintaining a cover of secrecy. Toward that end, if I were tasked with doing counterintelligence on the cover-up, I would have to consider the likelihood that they themselves have some role to play in the secrecy. There is a story about a famous murdered remote viewer by the name of Pat Price back in the 1970s. Pat Price was possibly the best remote viewer the United States ever had. He was an off-the-charts remote viewer. He was that good. He had one of the rare abilities to read alphanumeric information. That is, in other words, he could read documents and file cabinets and things like this. He was extremely, extremely proficient. On one occasion, he did, on his own, he said, some remote viewing work on where alien bases were here on planet Earth. He strolled into the office in the mid-70s of Hal Puthoff, who was running the program, and said, "Oh yes, by the way, I thought I would just on my spare time look to see where the alien bases were." This is true, he said this, and he identified several. They were all basically in mountain areas. So one was in the Pyrenees, one was in Mount Hayes, Alaska. And he said regarding that base, the Mount Hayes, Alaska base, he said that has political protection in the United States government. He said they have their people in the U.S. government who are making sure that no one pries in on that base. That particular base, the way Pat Price described it, was somewhat similar to how you might look at the base in the Hollywood movie Men in Black, you know, the huge alien depot where all the different races go, and humans as well. Not quite, I don't think he described it with quite the humor that you get in the movie, but in other words, a big transit point. And in fact, what Pat Price said to Puthoff about that base is when he was remote viewing it, they began remote viewing him, and he pulled away out of fear. So if that's true, then that would seem to indicate to me that there is some level of collaboration and or control that is being exercised by them within our society. Pat Price, I think, was certainly murdered in the mid-1970s. I think there's no question about this. When people look into the circumstances of his death, it looked like he was poisoned with a cup of coffee in a Las Vegas hotel.
In the early years of his administration, Ronald Reagan received a letter from Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb. Teller asked Reagan to consider implementing the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars. In this letter, Teller warns that a menace greater than the nuclear arms race exists. It does not originate here on Earth, but comes from space itself. Was the Star Wars program, later begun by President Reagan, created to stop hostile aliens?
But what must be recognized is that our security is based on being prepared to meet all threats. There was a time when we depended on coastal forts and artillery batteries because with the weaponry of that day, any attack would have had to come by sea. Well, this is a different world, and our defenses must be based on recognition and awareness of the weaponry possessed by other nations in the nuclear age. We can't afford to believe we will never be threatened. There have been 2 world wars in my lifetime. We didn't start them, and indeed did everything we could to avoid being drawn into them. But we were ill prepared for both. Had we been better prepared, peace might have been preserved.
Teller wrote a letter to President Reagan warning him about dangerous aliens, and he did it because he was probably blocked from having any direct communication with the president on the issue. Now, we know, according to the Serpo documents, that Reagan was probably briefed in 1981 on the aliens, but what they told him was kind of a nice story. I mean, he was told that 4 out of the 5 alien species we know about are friendly, and some of them might even help us if the bad ones went after us. And it may be that Teller knew more about how many hostile races were really out there, what their real objectives were, and he was trying to warn Reagan not to believe the guys that were telling him these airy-fairy, happy-go-lucky stories about the good aliens. Because I don't think anybody's going to help us if things get bad with the aliens at all. We're on our own, so we got to keep developing our own technology.
These are stories that have come to us again and again and again. They've come to me, relating about individuals who look just like you and me, but are not just like you and me. Individuals who are intensely telepathic, who are associated with often the UFO phenomenon. There are certainly stories, legitimate ones, I think, within the abduction research that indicate human and non-human collaboration. The Travis Walton abduction case comes to mind, in which Travis Walton in 1975 was aboard a craft, saw non-humans and saw very human-looking people on this craft.
In the 1980s, documents surfaced that suggested that President Truman in the 1950s was so worried about the alien presence that he created a secret group of men to look into the subject. This group of military people, scientists, and politicians would meet in secret. Their name became known as Majestic 12, or MJ-12.
In the early 90s, there was a fairly prominent UFO researcher by the name of Bob Exler, and he was involved in a lot of different kind of investigative activities. One of the things that he did was he had a telephone conversation with former NSA director Bobby Ray Inman, who within the intelligence community is something of a legend. After Inman left the NSA and left U.S. formal government service, he became a leading executive of the SAIC, which is one of the major defense contractors, one of the top, most prestigious defense contractors in the nation. Bobby Ray Inman is, among almost anyone you can think of, very plugged in to what is going on with all kinds of realities, including the UFO reality. Exler had a conversation with him on the phone and would not use the word extraterrestrial, would not use the word UFO explicitly, but in the context of his conversation with Inman, made it very clear that this is what he was talking about, and asked Inman about the reality of this. This is shortly after things like the Majestic 12 documents became known after, in the late 1980s. And it's very evident from the conversation, as reported by Exler, that Inman acknowledged the reality of a group like MJ-12, that is an oversight group managing the UFO reality. So I think that this actually happened. I would add that Exler's conversation with Inman is not the only type of conversation that confirmed the reality of MJ-12. I think equally important was a series of conversations held with a scientist named Eric Walker. Eric Walker was a friend of Dwight Eisenhower. He was former president of Penn State University, and most significantly was the head of an organization known as the Institute for Defense Studies. This was a powerful defense think tank. Researcher Grant Cameron, Scott Crane, and a few other people encountered Walker in the late 80s after MJ-12 became out there, and they found him with their own research, essentially led them to Walker. And Walker, in his first few conversations with them, absolutely admitted and acknowledged the reality of a group like MJ-12. Said almost exactly the same type of things that Inman said, but even more explicit.
The amount of secrecy involved in the UFO cover-up is truly astonishing. When you really analyze the information that we're bringing forward to you in this program, it will give you a paradigm shift in consciousness. You won't see the world the same way anymore. You begin to realize that the controllers of this planet have been put in a position of power by us. We have kind of really allowed them to take control of us. There's a true reality here where we, being the population of the world, 7.5 billion of us now, truly do have the power to overthrow them. The reason why they keep us suppressed and oppressed is because the technology and information about ancient civilizations and ETs keeps them in power. The less we know, the more power they can hold over us. This is why they spray poisons on our food. They have the depopulation agenda. This is why they do everything possible to keep us dumbed down and also sick and maybe even dying early. The elites that control this planet have a discrete agenda, and that agenda is to maintain control of the population of Earth. This is how come you see us using century-old technology. They won't let us advance into things like zero-point energy devices. They won't let us use different types of technologies that can make our lives a lot easier. They suppress and oppress that information and then create their own breakaway civilizations on other planets, negotiate possibly with other ET civilizations, keeping everything totally secret from us. In this way, they have maintained the control over us. But there will come a day when all 7.5 billion of us will wake up consciously to the next level, and we will find a way to join together and unite and take back control of our planet.
When I started talking to people who claimed to have had this abduction experience or being taken by aliens, for everyone I talked to who seemed to think it was a traumatic event, in fact, the very term abduction, is negative, makes it sound like that's a really terrible thing. And I can understand where people are, feel like they've been, taken against their will, and I can understand the negative of that. But I talked to an equal number of people who said, well, I had the same experience, and I said, I thought it was a pleasant experience. In fact, I had one woman tell me, I felt like I was an honored guest. So I think the phenomena has probably not been presented in its entirety. I think that the people who feel like they've had a scary or traumatic event, they tend to go seek help, professional help, or they join these support groups, and their story becomes public. And as a result, we have this whole popular negative connotation of abduction. But to the best of my ability, everyone who says I've been abducted, at some point they get brought back, okay? And then, like I said, there's an equal number of people who say, well, I thought it was kind of cool. They gave me a little tour, took me to another planet, showed me all this stuff, So I don't think that we yet have actually engaged the true extent of the phenomena.